Canadians vote on Monday after a campaign that has been shaped by the pandemic. As we've been discussing this morning, debate over having an election during the fourth wave at times has been louder than the talk about pandemic recovery. Well, this morning we take a closer look at recovery and what the parties are promising to do to lead the country forward. Here is Liberal leader Justin Trudeau as he appeared this week on the National's Face to Face series, talking with Rosemary Barton about a key part of the government's recovery program, and that is the CERB.
We're already replacing the CRB with a hiring benefit, which actually is money for employers to either top up the pay they're offering people or hire on new people, because we need to get that going. You mentioned the labor shortage. Yeah. We had a labor shortage in many parts of the country going into the pandemic. That's that's obviously the pandemic made it worse. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people also took time in the pandemic to rethink what it is they wanted to do, maybe go back to school virtually, and are coming out of it not wanting to go back to the same types of jobs. So we have to be there to continue to support things.
So, from Face to Face, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau. John is back as we take a look at the platforms and the party's COVID recovery plans. There's a couple of different facets to this, John. Yes, healthcare and the health crisis, but as far as economic recovery, first of all, talking about getting people back to work, helping businesses, what are the parties promising?
Yeah, absolutely, Heather. And this is a situation where the debate is around, do we wind up? Do we extend? Do we target? Do we massage? How do we get the economy back up and running again? There is a pent-up desire from the standpoint of consumers, certainly plenty of people anxious to get back to work, but also people having done some rethinking along the way. But the Liberals would argue, when they talk about their platform, that they, of course, have done a lot, billions of dollars in various supports. So they would extend some of those supports, but also a lot of talk about extending and focusing, targeting industries that were particularly hard hit. We know, of course, small business very hard hit. Tourism practically decimated in this country. So targeting those aspects of the economy moving forward in terms of the money. Airlines, of course, they can point to the bailout given to those airlines after months of negotiation. So all of that, whether they extend it or whether the benefits already poised will deliver dividends moving forward is the question in terms of the recovery, when that recovery happens. And let's face it, still very much in the midst of the pandemic and dealing with that. The Conservatives saying that they would wind down emergency spending, but they would focus on those hard-hit sectors, as we mentioned. They're calling it the Canada Jobs Surge Plan. Loans for retail, hospitality, and tourism. The NDP saying that throughout the pandemic, they have done their best. In fact, they would argue that the Liberals did much more than they wanted to because of the urging of the NDP throughout the pandemic. Again, focusing on small business and tourism, extending wage and rent subsidies for those particular sectors. And the Greens, well, they're looking at effectively moving forward in a whole different way, green jobs for those severely affected, and extend the wage and rent subsidies moving forward. But still, as we're at this juncture in the pandemic, a lot of question marks around what the recovery will look like and when it will be. Heather?
Bearing in mind, this country is very much socked in the pandemic still, fourth wave surging, and the way the government has responded to the health crisis is also part of this policy issue. So what are we hearing from the leaders on that aspect? Yeah,
absolutely. And of course, that can have an effect on the bottom line as well, and of course on the lives and health of Canadians. So when we look at that, we're seeing a difference in terms of the two main party leaders, in terms of the mandatory vaccines, which we've seen implemented by the then Liberal government, in terms of mandatory vaccines for not only all federally employed workers, but all of those in regulated industries. We're talking about transport there and a whole variety. And when we talk transport, we're talking airlines, we're talking rail, we're talking all of that. Crown corporations as well, those who do business arguably with the government and the thousands of businesses involved in that. So they're very clear in terms of bringing that forward. The Conservatives vary, and they are saying in terms of not the same requirement for a mandatory vaccination, but effectively then requiring daily rapid testing moving forward. So that is something that we've no doubt seen played out on the campaign trail in terms of not just looking after the health of Canadians moving forward, but how the campaign or how the pandemic was dealt with even before the campaign started. For the NDP, we're seeing mandatory vaccinations for federal employees, against the wishes, in some cases, we've seen of the unions who traditionally have lent support to the NDP throughout its history. And finally, when it comes to the Greens, they want a public inquiry into the response. The Conservatives want that as well, in terms of what the government did, when they did it, was there enough PPE, and both the Conservatives and the Greens were seeing a push towards having vaccines available and produced in this country. Of course, getting our vaccines from offshore, moving forward, ready for the next pandemic. PPE rather as well. The Greens pushing that Canada be able to produce that again, keeping an eye not only to the extent of this pandemic, but perhaps future ones that are lurking around the corner.